"Excuse me, sir. Would you mind switching seats? The family would be more comfortable if they all sat up here." That's what she said, right in front of a full cabin. To a black man, mid-50s, quiet, tailored navy suit, first-class seat already paid for. She didn't ask the white man in 2C, didn't ask the couple in 1A and 1B. Just him. No explanation, no apology, just a tight smile, like she was doing him a favor. But here's the part she didn't know. That man? He wasn't just flying. He owned the skies she worked under, and 15 minutes later, that plane never left the gate because he made one phone call, and the whole flight crew found themselves grounded, while the rest of the cabin sat in stunned silence. What kind of man stays quiet until the moment it matters most? What happens when power doesn't shout? It just shifts. If you've ever been asked to make room for someone less deserving, this story is for you. You're listening to a true story of dignity, silence, and power that walked on calmly and shut the whole thing down. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now, let me tell you exactly what happened that afternoon on Flight 263. He walked on quietly, but every step held weight. He didn't walk fast, didn't stroll either. Just one calm step at a time, briefcase in hand, shoulders square, like a man who never needed to rush. Elias Moore was always early. Not out of fear, out of respect. Respect for time, respect for space, and yes, respect for himself. Flight 263 to Atlanta, operated by Sky Connect, a regional partner of Dominion Air. Departure time, 1:45 p.m. Gate C7. He arrived at 12:58. The gate agent smiled politely, scanned his ticket, and said, "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Moore." She didn't know who he was, but she didn't need to. Her job was done right. He walked down the jet bridge, that familiar hollow echo underfoot. Rows of ads for credit cards and vacation packages. Nothing new. What caught his attention was the crew. 3 attendants near the front, 2 chatting quietly, 1 fixing the overhead bins. He offered a soft nod as he entered. "Good afternoon," he said. 1 returned the greeting, the other 2 didn't look up. Seat 2A, window first class. He placed his briefcase under the seat in front, took out a leather-bound folder, clicked his seatbelt. Nothing flashy, just a man with his papers, his calm, and his place. A white man, mid-30s, ball cap, oversized carry-on, dropped into 2C beside him. Didn't say hello, didn't even glance at Elias, which was fine. Elias had learned long ago not to expect warmth from strangers, especially not up here. Boarding continued, more voices, bags being shuffled. Flight attendant calls out, "Boarding group 5, now welcome." Somewhere behind him, a toddler started to cry. He closed his eyes briefly, breathed in and out. The attendant came through the first-class cabin with a tray of water and paper towels. Stopped in front of Elias, paused, then kept going. Didn't offer him anything. He opened his eyes, didn't say a word. He'd noticed, but chose not to respond. Not yet. She smiled like it was a favor, but it wasn't. The cabin had mostly settled. One final family was still boarding. A woman in her 40s, 2 kids, a tired-looking husband juggling tablets and snacks. Coach seats, row 17. But as they walked by, something changed. The wife slowed down in front of first class, looked to the left to row 2, then turned to the flight attendant standing at the bulkhead, whispered something. It wasn't loud, but Elias saw it, not the words. The gesture, a nod toward 2A, then a kind of expectant glance, as if she'd just ordered off menu at a restaurant and was waiting for it to be delivered. A few minutes passed. Elias stayed in his seat, eyes still on his folder. He wasn't reading anymore. just holding it open, keeping his hands still. From the corner of his eye, he saw the same attendant, short blonde bob, navy uniform pressed tight, walking toward him with purpose. She stopped beside him, spoke with that sugary tone that always came before something sour. "Hi there, Mr. Moore, is it?" He turned to her, calm. "Yes," she smiled again, too tight. "So sorry to bother you. We have a family traveling with young children, and it would really help them sit together. Would you mind switching seats with one of the passengers in coach?" He blinked. "Excuse me?" She tilted her head, as if repeating it slower would make it sound more reasonable. "The family in the back, they were separated during check-in, and we're trying to make them more comfortable. It would really help if you could switch seats with one of the parents. It's just a few rows back." He didn't respond right away, not with anger, not with shock. He simply studied her. "Are you asking others in this cabin as well?" he asked. She blinked. "Pardon? Pardon. Are you asking others to move too, or just me?" Her smile faded just a bit. "Well, the other passengers are traveling solo or in pairs. You were seated alone, and was I selected because I'm alone or because I look like I don't belong?" Her eyes widened. "Just a flash. I didn't mean anything by it. We're just trying to make it work for the family. We don't mean to cause any discomfort." He looked at her. "You already have." There was no heat in his voice, no raised tone, just ice. Calm and controlled, the kind of calm that made other people nervous. She tried again. "If you'd just help us out." "No," he said plainly. "I paid for this seat. I arrived early. I followed protocol. But, sir—" "No." This time firmer. He returned to his folder. She lingered for half a beat longer, just long enough to remind him she wasn't used to being told no, then turned and walked away. Behind him he heard whispers, the woman from row 17 peering toward the front, her husband shrugging, a murmur rising in the aisle. But Elias? He sat still. Not because he didn't feel the weight of it, but because he'd carried heavier, much heavier. First they asked. Then they insisted. But he still didn't move. It had been 4 minutes. The murmur behind Elias had quieted, but the tension had not. From the corner of his eye, he saw the flight attendant again, but this time she wasn't alone. A man in uniform followed her. Tall, salt and pepper hair, clipboard in hand, the kind of presence meant to signal authority without needing to say it. Elias closed his folder, rested it neatly on his lap. The attendant stood just beside him again, now a little stiffer. The man, a flight supervisor judging by the badge and the tone, stepped forward. "Sir," he began, "I understand you've chosen not to accommodate a seating request for a family?" Elias didn't flinch. "I chose to remain in the seat I paid for." There was no edge in his voice, just facts, just clarity. The supervisor nodded slowly as if that was an unreasonable response. "You do understand, sir, that we're trying to make this flight run smoothly for all our passengers?" Elias looked at him evenly, "And I assume that starts with honoring the boarding process and paid reservations?" The supervisor gave a small, tight laugh. "Come on, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." And there it was, the turn. From request to pressure. Wrapped in a reasonable voice, Elias leaned back slightly, eyes still on the man. "This seat is mine. I've done nothing to disrupt your process, unless you're suggesting that refusing to give up my seat qualifies as a disruption?" The attendant shifted behind him, arms crossed now. The supervisor paused, then dropped the real line. "Sir? If you're unwilling to cooperate, we may need to ask you to disembark, just until this matter is resolved." Elias blinked. Once. Then, slowly, he reached into his inside jacket pocket, pulled out a phone, unlocked it without a word. The supervisor stiffened just slightly, as if realizing the scene was shifting, but didn't yet know how. Elias tapped a number. put the phone to his ear. The voice on the other end picked up on the first ring. "Chairman Moore," the voice said, crisp and alert. "Everything all right, sir?" He didn't speak for show, didn't raise his voice, just 3 words: "Delay the flight," then hung up. For the first time, the supervisor blinked. "I'm sorry, who?" Elias turned to him, calm as ever. "You'll want to check your manifest," he said, "and your operating license agreement. And can a visit an ovation level test?" Then, 1 beat later, "I'll wait." He reached for the leather folder again, opened it, and returned to reading. The flight attendant didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't move. She just stared, unsure whether to be confused, offended, or afraid. The supervisor stepped back, murmured something into a small radio clipped to his side. The message was short. The fallout, not so much. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He made 1 phone call, and now the whole plane was still. At first it was subtle. The murmurs started again, passengers checking watches, flight apps, looking out the window trying to spot the luggage carts. But nothing moved. No one loaded bags, no doors closed, no prepare for takeoff announcements, just a thick humming silence. And the growing itch of something gone wrong. Row 3 whispered first. A man leaned toward the aisle and asked, "Why haven't we left?" Row 6 followed. Then row 9. Then a child asking too loudly, "Mommy, are we stuck?" By minute 12, people weren't whispering anymore. They were standing, opening overhead bins, flagging down attendants. But the lead flight attendant, the same one who'd smiled too tightly earlier, wasn't smiling now. She stood, frozen by the galley, arms folded, face stiff. And Elias, still in 2A, still reading, still unbothered. The captain hadn't come out yet, but something was clearly happening. From the cockpit, a second uniformed crew member emerged. Not the pilot, not the co-pilot. Someone in dark blazer, headset half clicked in. He walked briskly down the aisle, eyes scanning the front rows, stopped just behind Elias, whispered something to the supervisor. The supervisor nodded, swallowed, then leaned into his radio again. More quiet words, more invisible tension, like invisible wires were tightening across the cabin. Passengers noticed. People started asking louder, "What's going on? Why are we still here? Did somebody get sick? Is it a bomb threat?" The family in row 17, the one that sparked this whole thing, shrank into their seat. The wife stared straight ahead. The husband scrolled his phone like it was a shield. And Elias, still in 2A, legs crossed, one hand resting on the folder. He didn't flinch when a passenger leaned over from 1C and asked quietly, "Hey man, what's happening?" Elias simply said, "We're waiting on accountability," and returned to the page. It wasn't loud, but everyone heard him, because silence amplifies the truth. Names were called, radios clicked, and every uniform started to look nervous. The first change came quietly at 1:56 p.m., 11 minutes after scheduled takeoff. A new voice came over the intercom. Not the flight attendant, not the captain. It was ground control. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. This flight is currently experiencing a procedural delay. Please remain seated while we address the situation." That was it. No explanation, no timeline, just enough to confirm one thing. This wasn't normal. In first class, heads turned. Passengers began pulling out their phones, searching news, texting spouses, recording video. Quietly, subtly, just in case. And still, Elias Moore said nothing. He didn't have to, because now others were speaking for him. Down on the tarmac, a black SUV pulled up near the jet bridge, unmarked, engines still running. Inside the terminal, 2 corporate staff members walked through security, not TSA, not crew, but the kind with clearance and purpose. The kind that didn't smile. Didn't rush. Just arrived. Inside the plane, a crew member approached the captain's door, knocked twice, then opened it. Whispers. A few clipped phrases. One of them included the name Dominion Board. The captain's face shifted from passive patience to something like dread. He stood up, straightened his blazer, and stepped out. When he reached the first-class cabin, he didn't speak to the passengers. He walked straight to the aisle where Elias sat, paused, then cleared his throat softly. Mr. Moore. Not sir, not passenger, Mr. Moore. The rest of the cabin noticed. You could feel it, like a gust of recognition. Even the flight attendant standing nearby froze. Her eyes widened slightly. The captain bent forward. I've just been informed we're coordinating with Dominion Executive Operations. There'll be a brief delay while some matters are addressed. Elias nodded once. Understood. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, just acknowledged. Because this wasn't news to him, this was the plan, and now it was in motion. Outside, 2 uniformed airline employees entered the jet bridge. One carried a folder, one carried a list, and within minutes 2 crew members, the lead flight attendant and the supervisor, were quietly removed from the aircraft. They didn't make a scene, but their faces said enough. Red, tight, humiliated. Passengers murmured louder now. Someone in row 8 whispered, "Wait, that's the guy who wouldn't move." Another replied, "No, man, I think that's the guy who owns the whole airline." They tried to offer him more. He chose to stay where they tried to move him from. The replacement crew came on board at 2:11 p.m. Efficient, quiet, no smiles, no small talk. They had clearly been briefed. The new lead attendant, an older black woman with silver in her braids, approached Elias first. There was no hesitation, no patronizing tone, just respect. "Mr. Moore," she said gently, "we've made arrangements if you'd prefer to disembark and wait in the private terminal. You'll have full access to the executive suite until we board a new flight." Elias didn't even glance up from his folder. "I'm fine here." She nodded, but hesitated just for a breath. "We understand the situation was unacceptable. Dominion Executive Services has authorized immediate rerouting, private car service, anything you need." He closed the folder softly, then looked at her, not with anger, not with pride, but something deeper. Stillness. "I don't need a different seat," he said. "I need this one to matter." She nodded again, this time slower, and left him be. Passengers watched it all. Some shifted uncomfortably, some avoided his gaze, some whispered, now fully aware that whatever had just happened was bigger than a seating dispute. A teenager in row 5 tapped his mom and whispered, "That guy's a boss, huh?" She nodded. The boss. 20 minutes later, the flight was cleared for takeoff. Elias sat in 2A, still, exactly where he was told. Moments earlier, he didn't belong, but this time the silence around him wasn't heavy, it was reverent. The wheels touched down, but something else had already landed in every heart that watched him. They took off at 2:38 p.m., 53 minutes behind schedule. No one complained, not one voice. Not one passive-aggressive sigh, just the hum of engines, the low clink of ice against glass, and a silence that wasn't awkward. It was recalibrated. In 2A, Elias Moore read quietly for a while, not pretending to, actually reading. There was nothing performative in him, no glance to see who was watching, no smugness, no satisfaction, just presence. Solid as the seatbelt around his waist, grounded, even midair. Across the aisle, the man in 2C, the same one who hadn't even said hello during boarding, kept looking over now. Not with guilt, not with fear, with something closer to curiosity. The kind of stare that says, "I thought I knew what power looked like, but now I'm not so sure." Further back, row 5 had questions. Row 7 was already on Reddit. Row 10 quietly Googled, Dominion Airlines CEO, Black Executive. And when the search bar finished his name for them, Elias Moore, chairman of Dominion Aviation Group, the cabin got a little quieter again. When the captain finally came over the speaker 30 minutes before landing, his voice was measured. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Atlanta shortly. We thank you for your patience today and for your attention. This has been a meaningful flight for many reasons. You could almost hear the hesitation behind that last line, like he wanted to say more but knew better than to try. The plane touched down smoothly. Wheels kissed the runway like nothing had happened. But inside the cabin, something had happened. People sat straighter, phones stayed in pockets, and for once, the rush to deplane wasn't so urgent. They waited, watched, until Elias Moore stood, straightened his jacket, lifted his leather folder, and stepped into the aisle. Not a single passenger moved to block him. Some nodded, some said nothing, but a few, a small few, murmured words like a quiet offering. Sir, thank you. That was something else. He didn't reply to every voice, but he looked them in the eye, everyone. Not to teach, not to correct, just to remind them he was real. The plane landed, but the story flew. It started with a whisper, a quiet post from someone in row 7, no hashtags, just a sentence. I watched a black CEO get asked to give up his seat. He didn't. You should have seen what happened next. Then came the screenshots. A blurry photo of Elias Moore standing in the aisle. Another of the captain speaking to him. Then one frame that would get shared again and again. Elias sitting in 2A, calm, while uniformed staff were escorted off the plane. By nightfall, it was viral. Not loud viral, but the kind that matters. On LinkedIn, quiet professionals shared it like gospel. One woman wrote, "That kind of dignity, that's legacy work. That's how change starts, by sitting where they told you not to." Another, "My father once told me, never fight for the seat, fight for what the seat represents." But inside Dominion, things moved faster. By the next morning, there was an all-hands email from the CEO. Not Elias, he stayed silent. This came from the interim chief of operations. "We are conducting a full review of the incident on Flight 263. We have reached out personally to Mr. Moore. Let this moment serve as a mirror." A mirror. They used that word on purpose, because it wasn't just about one man being asked to move. It was about why they thought he'd agree. The lead flight attendant and the supervisor were placed on leave, not because of Elias. He didn't demand it, didn't ask for heads to roll. He simply said, "If your people are trained to see me as the exception, maybe the problem is the training." Or back at the airport, a young employee from the gate, the woman who had scanned Elias' ticket, replayed it all in her head. She hadn't said much. She hadn't stopped him. But now, she kept hearing her own voice say, "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Moore," and realized he hadn't enjoyed it. He had endured it. So she wrote him a message, just 5 lines, no signature. "I saw what happened. I saw who stayed calm. I saw who kept their seat. You didn't have to say a word, but somehow you taught us everything." He didn't come to yell. He came to rebuild. The glass walls of the Dominion boardroom gleamed under the overhead lights. A long table stretched the length of the room, polished to a mirror shine. Around it sat the most powerful executives in the company. Suits tight, eyes sharp, phones on the table like weapons. The air was thick, not from tension alone, but from expectation. They all knew why Elias Moore had called this meeting. He entered quietly. No entourage, no fanfare. Just a man in a navy suit, steady as a rock. He didn't scan the room. He didn't wait for applause. He simply took his seat. The chairwoman, a woman with steel-grap hair and a voice like a bell, nodded at him. "Mr. Moore, the floor is yours." Elias looked around, saw the faces, some curious, some defensive. He spoke, calm and deliberate. "I'm not here to rehash what happened on Flight 263. A pause. "I'm here to make sure it never happens again." He laid out a plan. A comprehensive review of training programs, mandatory diversity and inclusion workshops. Clear protocols empowering staff to treat all passengers with respect, regardless of who they think they see. He wasn't seeking blame. He was seeking change. One executive raised an eyebrow. "You expect to fix decades of systemic bias with training sessions?" Elias met her gaze. "Systemic bias is baked into systems, but systems can be changed." The room went quiet. For the first time, no one interrupted, no one doubted, they listened. And as the meeting closed, Elias knew this was only the beginning. But it was the moment the real work started. Change doesn't happen in a day, but it always begins with a choice. The conference room had emptied hours ago, but Elias Moore stayed behind. The lights dimmed, shadows stretching across the polished oak table. He gazed out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city hum beneath the fading sunset. Around him, the quiet was different now, not the sterile silence of routine business, but the heavy stillness of something shifting. Email notifications pinged softly on his phone, each one a ripple from the storm he'd set in motion. A flight attendant from another airline sending thanks for the courage to stand firm. A junior executive confessing how the event opened her eyes to her own biases. A longtime client writing how his respect for Dominion had deepened not in spite of the incident, but because of the response. And then the hardest messages. From the crew who'd been removed, short, defensive, trying to explain, to justify, to shift blame. Elias didn't respond. Some lessons he knew had to be learned in silence. He leaned back in his chair, remembering the flight, the way people looked, the quiet conversations overheard, the grudging respect that had replaced whispered judgment. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle, like stars fallen to earth. He picked up his leather folder again, flipped to the first page. His own handwriting. Respect isn't given because it's easy. It's earned every day. By the choices we make when no one is watching. Tomorrow would bring meetings, reports, more conversations, the real challenge. But tonight he allowed himself a quiet moment, a deep breath, knowing that sometimes the loudest power is the power to remain seated. Sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest echoes. I want you to take a moment and picture Elias Moore again. Not just the CEO who grounded a plane, not the man who made a call that stopped an entire flight, but the person behind it all. Calm, deliberate, steady. A man who didn't raise his voice, didn't shout or rage, but who chose instead to sit firmly in his dignity. What does that teach us? That power isn't always about being loudest in the room. Sometimes it's about having the courage to stay put when everyone else expects you to move. It's about knowing your worth without needing to prove it. It's about holding space for yourself even when the world tries to push you aside. Listening to Elias's story, I felt something deep, the frustration of being seen as less than, the exhaustion of having to earn respect that should be given freely, and the quiet strength it takes to push back without breaking. This isn't just a story about a flight or a seat. It's about every time we've been told to step aside, at work, in our communities, in life. It's about reclaiming that space, not with anger, but with unshakable grace. What stayed with me most was how Elias didn't make this about punishment. He didn't want revenge. He wanted a system that stops asking Black people to prove their place. He wanted respect as a default, not a privilege earned by convenience or appearance. So to every woman listening, especially those who have been overlooked or dismissed, remember this: you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight with fists or fury. Sometimes the greatest revolution is the quiet decision to stand firm in who you are. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If Elias' story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, please like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from, and share your own moments of quiet strength. Because these stories, your stories, deserve to be heard. And together, they create a powerful chorus that no one can ignore. Power isn't about volume, it's about the strength to stay. Even when they ask you to move.